Tonight's story isn't fiction. It comes from the dry heart of rural Brazil in the early 1960s, a place where nights were long and silence could stretch thin enough for strange things to slip through. What you're about to hear is a real missing person case recorded in official Brazilian Air Force archives under envelope 05. It has been told the same way for more than 60 years, by the man who watched his father vanish into something he couldn't explain. This is Midnight Horror Society's dark curiosity for sleep. Real stories told in calm voices. Get comfortable. And when you're ready, let's step into tonight's story. The first thing Raimundo remembered was how quiet it became after his father vanished. One moment, the air outside their small house was alive, hissing, whispering, turning in on itself like breath caught in glass. And the next, it folded into silence so complete that even the insects stopped. He stood in the doorway, barefoot on packed earth, his lungs refusing to move. The yellow smoke hung there for a heartbeat longer, dense and swirling, like it had been poured instead of blown. He could see it shifting, thick coils rising and falling around the rough frame of the door. And within that smoke, faint shapes spun, metallic, cylinder-like, glowing softly as they turned in perfect rhythm. His father, Rivalino, had stepped toward them with the steady gait of a man who'd already decided not to turn back. He had one hand raised, the dull gleam of a knife catching the light. Then the smoke swallowed him whole. "Pai!" Raimundo shouted. The sound came out thinner than it should have, swallowed by the heavy air. He ran forward, every part of him focused on grabbing that sleeve, that arm, anything. When he plunged through the yellow veil, it was like falling into another version of silence. The smoke didn't drift or scatter. It simply vanished. The cylinders were gone, and his father wasn't there. 6 decades earlier, in a forgotten corner of Brazil called Duas Pontes, the Mafra da Silva family lived in a shack with only 2 rooms. The walls were mud and thatch. The roof leaked when it rained. The air inside always smelled faintly of smoke and damp clay. There was no electricity, no radio, no telephone. When night came, their world shrank to whatever the fire could reach. Rivalino Mafra da Silva was a quiet man who worked odd jobs: wood gathering, hauling clay, trading what little he could for salt or sugar. He had 3 sons. The oldest, Raimundo, was 12 that summer of 1962. The younger 2 still slept in a pile of straw and dreams. Their lives followed the rhythm of the land, up before sunrise to bed after the fire burned low. When the day's work ended, they sat shoulder to shoulder by the hearth, letting the night hum around them. That August evening began like all the others. The soft pop of kindling, the whisper of wind outside, the unspoken comfort of being together when the dark pressed close. No one could have known that in just a few hours, the world beyond those walls would start speaking their names. It began with a sound that didn't belong. From the kitchen came a scrape, quick, close to the ground, not quite animal and not quite human. It was the sort of noise that catches in your chest before your mind can name it. Raimundo turned toward the door. The firelight stretched his father's shadow across the floor. Something moved. A dark figure, low and fast, crossed the kitchen floor and slipped into the far corner where the light couldn't reach. He only saw it for an instant, but it was enough to make the small hairs on his arms rise. He looked to his father and saw the same frozen stare. Before Raimundo could speak, Rivalino was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, slammed the kitchen door shut, and dropped the latch. The sound jolted the younger boys awake. "What was that?" Raimundo whispered. Rivalino didn't answer. He stood still, one hand pressed flat to the door, listening. The fire crackled softly behind him. His face was tight, unreadable. Finally, he turned back toward his sons. "It's all right," he said, voice low and steady. "We're safe in here." He said it like a man trying to convince the night. For a time, nothing moved except the flames. The younger boys drifted back toward sleep, and Raimundo tried to convince himself it had been an illusion. Smoke and shadow, nothing more. Then came the voices. At first, they were faint, murmurs blending with the wind. But the words grew clearer, sharper, threading through the cracks in the walls. They were calling a name. His father's name. Rivalino. The voices multiplied. 3, maybe 4, rough, laughing voices without warmth. "If he comes out," one said, "we'll kill him." Every child in the room turned to their father. Rivalino stayed perfectly still, head tilted toward the sound. The firelight danced across his knuckles as his hand tightened around the latch. "It's a cruel joke," he said finally. "Someone from the town. We stay here till morning," so they waited. The voices lingered for a while, then faded into the dark. Outside, something brushed against the wall, once, twice, as though testing it. Then nothing. The fire burned low. The youngest boy began to snore softly. Raimundo stared at the door and counted the seconds until the first hint of dawn. When light finally crept through the cracks in the walls, it felt like waking from a nightmare without being sure the dream had ended. Rivalino stood, straightened his shirt, and told his sons to stay where they were. He unlatched the kitchen door slowly. No sound, no movement. Just the soft gray air of early morning. He turned back. "It's fine," he said. "Don't move." He crossed into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. Raimundo held his breath. He heard normal sounds at first. Footsteps, the scrape of a chair, the faint clink of metal. Then, after a long pause, his father returned. In his hand was a knife. "I'm going outside," he said quietly, "to make sure." The boys didn't answer. They just watched. Rivalino managed a brief smile. Not reassurance exactly, but acknowledgement. Then he stepped through the kitchen again, opened the outer door, and disappeared into the pale light. The air shifted in the room, cool for a moment, then still. That was the last sound they heard from him. Raimundo waited until he couldn't anymore. He told himself he would just peek, make sure his father was standing in the yard, knife in hand, ready to say everything was all right. He opened the kitchen door. The outer door stood wide open. Beyond it, the yard was filled with yellow haze, swirling like smoke but moving with purpose. It rolled and folded, holding its shape as though commanded by something unseen. Inside that haze floated several dark shapes, cylinders, metallic and turning. Each rotation gave off more of the yellow mist until the doorway itself looked alive. And in the center of it, Rivalino stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He simply walked into the heart of it. "Pie!" Raimundo yelled and ran after him. He hit the threshold and the smoke vanished. No glow, no movement, no sound. Only the pale morning light and the empty yard. He called out again and again, circling the small house, searching the ground for footprints, broken grass, anything. There was nothing. It was as though the world had shut its mouth around a single name. Neighbors came when the boys called for help. Soon men from the nearest town arrived, followed by local authorities. They searched for days. The surrounding scrubland was combed inch by inch. A mile away stood a great boulder, split by a narrow crevice. They checked there too, lowering lamps into the dark, calling Rivalino's name into the hollow. Nothing. Weeks turned to months. The case grew cold. Then, on March 10th, 1963, 6 months after that morning, a group of hunters passed near the same boulder. One of them noticed a faint smell rising from the crevice, earthy, metallic, wrong. He looked closer and saw pale bone in the shadows. Authorities came again. They found what was left. The skeleton was identified as Rivalino Mafra da Silva. No cause of death could be confirmed. No one could explain how his body ended up where the search had already passed. In official language, it became an unresolved disappearance. But the Brazilian Air Force later filed it under envelope 05, Pontes Incident. The report was brief. Unidentified aerial phenomena observed prior to disappearance. Witness: minor male Raimundo never changed his account. Not once. He said a shape crossed their kitchen. He said voices called his father's name. He said his father walked into a yellow cloud filled with spinning cylinders. And when he followed, everything was gone. Decades passed, but he told it the same way. No embellishment, no edits. He never claimed to know what it was, only that it happened. Some called it a crime disguised by superstition. Some called it proof of something not of this earth. And others said it was the mind's way of making sense of grief. A boy's imagination freezing the moment before he could admit his father was gone. But in Duas Pontes, people still whisper about that night. They say the wind carries a faint hum across the fields, low, rhythmic, almost mechanical. The shack still stands, its 2 rooms long since emptied. The walls creak when the heat shifts, like an old house remembering. Raimundo never went back. When asked what he believes, he only says, "I saw what I saw, and I ran when I shouldn't have." Then he looks toward the horizon, where dawn always begins with a thin streak of yellow light. Have you ever seen something so strange you kept the details small, just so people would believe you?